Terese, I got to know you a few weeks ago when I saw you at the October 13th hearing, and you were one of the first people arrested. And in a 3.5-minute span, 7 people were arrested for apparently no reason at all. I was there. I was appalled. I thought to myself, this is what it must have been like in the 1930s in Nazi Germany. And it was concern, and I was deeply disturbed because clearly you were sitting next to Frank Staples, you didn't make a peep. When they tapped you on the shoulder, and I saw this in the videos afterwards, you got up, you quietly, silently, and obediently left the room with them. And you were arrested. And I'd appreciate it if you could explain what actually happened.
So on October 13th, there's a lot of backdrop, I guess, leading up to that day and how I ended up even being at the Executive Council. But that day we went in, before the meeting started, we had prayed outside, we had sung songs together. We had decided that under all circumstances we were going to sit silently, and we had felt that we had done all we could to let our elected officials know how we felt about this grant money, and it was time to let them vote and discern where they would land on that. We had given it our best effort to voice, what we felt was best for New Hampshire. So we went in, and we did talk about if at some point or when we got to the actual vote, if people were feeling as though they needed to express themselves in any way, to stand and simply turn their back to the vote and then sit down quietly, but nothing that would disrupt or stop them from being able to hear each other or to, conduct business. And so we went in and we sat down, and there was a point where they were talking about bringing the funds in and setting up, facilitating the vaccines for children. And it was about an hour into the meeting.
The counselors and the governor were so far away, they couldn't even hear us.
Right. And there came a point where GATSIS was actually being very fiscally responsible and asking about the money of the contracts and questioning startup fees, and you could tell, the room was appreciative of his questions.
And the $400 million in deficit spending that the department was in.
Yeah, and I remember there was a point in time where it was, well, we'll just keep bringing this back to the table until it does get approved. Like how long, I think GATSIS was like, how long are we going to keep revisiting this? And, you could hear people under their breath, like, disappointed that our legislators would continue to noodle things and, just the bureaucratic process of some of it.
But again, it was never disruptive.
No, it was, human nature. I don't think there was anything that was louder than a natural cough or sneeze, if there was a sigh or something of that nature throughout the room.
So what happened after the state troopers tapped you on the shoulder?
So they tapped me on the shoulder. They asked me to come with them. So I didn't know what to make of it. Got up and went to the back of the room, and they pulled back a drape. And I didn't even realize the back wall was a drape until that moment. And behind the drape, there's like double the size of the room. But my first thing was, wait a minute, everyone could have been in the room. And then, then I'm like, wait, why are all these vans here? Because I just thought, my significant other's a mechanic, and and then I realized they were all sheriff, police, paddy wagons. And then there's just this sea of troopers.
A plethora of troopers.
I can't even tell you how many. And they're like, you're under arrest. And they took my hands and zip-tied them. And my first breath was, but why? And they said, disorderly conduct. And I said, what did I do? And they couldn't respond. They couldn't answer. and they said, we need to take this off your sweater. I had a Bolduc for Senate pin on my sweater. They removed that, which I never got back. Need another one. But they removed it, and then they went to tell me, lift me into, or just carry my arm into the back of the paddy wagon. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have to work tonight. Oh my gosh, my 6 and 7-year-old are outside. This whole thought of this is happening. And so
So as you're being arrested, your children are at the venue with you.
Yeah, they were outside with my significant other's mom. They were going to go over to the planetarium, but I realized she wasn't going to know what happened to me. When I got up and went to the back of the room, I didn't grab my purse or my phone or anything. So I just all of a sudden felt like, oh my gosh, what is happening, and will anyone know what's happening to me? So I just yelled out, I'm being arrested. And that was already with the zip ties on, and as I was getting into the back of the van.
Well, that's reasonable. You had your personal belongings outside.
And my children.
And your children. 10 weeks ago,
Yeah.
you'd never done this before.
No.
So how'd you get into this?
So I'm a registered nurse. Graduated about, will be 12 years this spring. I've had concerns. It kind of was doing the watchful waiting that a lot of us clinicians will do when we think something might not be okay, but we're not sure. Had a couple experiences just with my own caseload and patients, and just kind of watching what was going on ever since the election, just politically also, the landscape there. But it really, the pinpoint for me was kind of came up for air. My adoption date for my last child was on August 2nd, and that's always a Herculean effort to get through the process of adopting a child. And I finally had some time to I was spending all that effort with caseworkers and CASA and everyone else coming through the house, and kind of getting that across the finish line. But I started paying more attention to what was going on in the rest of the world. And I remember one night there was, came through my Facebook feed, there was a young veteran, and he was doing a Facebook Live, and he just had such emotion in his body language that it caught my attention. And he was basically articulating that his wife was an LNA at Dartmouth-Hitchcock, and she was in the final semester finishing her nursing degree, and she was also pregnant. And I knew the mandate had been rolled out for the Dartmouth employees. I had worked there for 3 years as a triage nurse for 3 PCPs in Concord. And I have a lot of friends that are still there, and just concerns for them and where they were landing with it. There had been some sidebar conversations I'd had with several of them. And so I was listening to this young dad, or soon-to-be dad, and he was deciding to take up a 30-day vigil outside of Lebanon, and he basically was articulating our whole blood, sweat, and tears. I know how hard it is to get through nursing school is hanging in the balance. She's going to be kicked out of nursing school. She's going to lose her job as an LNA unless she gets this vaccine, they're telling her. And we've got this unborn child, and I just don't feel safe about this. And how could this be that we're losing everything we have fought for? And when is somebody going to stand up? When is everyone going to start standing up for our medical freedom? And it made me cry. My heart went out to him. And I sat there and I said, I can't stand with this young dad in Lebanon. But I took a position in March where I am now working evenings, 5 p.m. to 8 a.m., that I'm on call with critically ill patients. So that if we did go remote learning again, or if I needed to homeschool my boys, I would have an easier time doing that than the year before. The year before, doing remote learning was very, very challenging for me. A single mom with these 3 children, developmentally delayed, having to transition to homeschool, remote learning at home, trying to still stay in the game with my employer. And I did it, but it wasn't fun. It wasn't fun for any of us. So speed up, I hear this young man speak, and I'm like, okay, the boys are at the YMCA during the day. The nights that I don't get called out a lot, I actually could not go to the barn and ride my horse, I could actually go stand up and stand with him in solidarity. And then I thought, well, it'd be a lot easier to do it in Concord. I've started my career at Concord Hospital for 3 years. I was at Dartmouth for 3 years. I was at Concord Regional VNA for 3 years. If I stood in Concord, that's really where my circle of influence is. I have a lot of clinicians. I have a lot of peers that have worked with me over the years. It would make more sense to stand in Concord. And that's what I did. I reached out to him, told him that his Facebook Live empowered me to do something, and that it wasn't in vain, that I heard his voice, that I heard him. And he said, go stand tomorrow. And I said, David, I can't stand tomorrow. I could stand Wednesday. And I think it was Walkout Wednesday, like nationally, there was some sort of something going on that Wednesday. So I kind of earmarked that in my mind. I went and got a poster board from the dollar store, and I made a sign that just said, honk if you're against mandatory mandates, vaccine mandates. And it was 95 degrees out that day. And I remember standing there, and I had my Bluetooth speaker, so at least I had some music. But the first car that went by actually had their window down. And with my red hair in the small community that I'm in, I heard, Terese, you're a nurse, and you should be ashamed of yourself. And my first thought is, dear Lord, why am I standing here right now?
And he sent you a message.
And then there was a honk. And then this sweet little lady walked across the crosswalk, and she said, I pulled my car over because I want to stand with you. And then another couple pulled their car over. He was going for diagnostics, and he decided they were going to stand.
God sent you troops.
He did. And I think we ended that day with maybe 13 people standing there. From 9 to 4, we were there. But the most beautiful thing was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We were tired. We were hot. We were a mess. But people were honking. People were honking. All of a sudden, I saw this lady out of the corner of my eye, and she was climbing up the little ravine from the Dartmouth Hitchcock parking lot. And she waved me over. And she says, I just want you to know, I work up in Concord Hospital, and I work in the administrative offices. And on Wednesday, they meet to talk about staffing and the fact that they may have to roll out this mandate. And they heard the cars honking, and they looked out the window, and they saw you. I came to tell you, please don't let this be a once and done thing. Please come back.
Another message from God.
Yep. And she walked back down. She says, if anyone sees me, I'm in trouble. And she walked back down. And I thought, okay, so I pack up everything. I go home. I'm like, what could I do? And I'm like, well, the boys are at the YMCA. If I did every other day, just 2 hours at lunchtime, there's a lot of traffic through that intersection. And so that's what I did. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, 11 to 1, I stood. And just on my Facebook page and my circle of influence and all my coworkers that have been clinicians and their families and friends, I said, this is what I'm doing. And people started to stand and join with me. And then we had nurses walk down from Concord Hospital on their lunch break. We had clinicians walking from Pleasant View to come join and make their signs. And it was beautiful. And then I realized we should do a Friday night, and we should hit the shift change and be out here maybe like 6 to 8. That way people who are coming on and off shift, if they wanted to come stand with us, they could. And so we did a Friday night. And the first Friday night, there was 3 of us. Me, my significant other, and one other person. And the intersection was dead silent. And we're like, why are we here? But the following Friday, somehow some of the Liberty groups caught wind of what we were doing. And there was like, all of a sudden, 130 people showed up. And someone had made a little cartoon character of me and floated around. And all these people showed up, and I went home with a pocket full of business cards of different state reps and this Liberty group and, this and that. And there were some individuals there that I was like, who is this? And took me aback a little bit, one of which was Frank. And he had, I'll never forget, he had a shirt on that said Palestine on it. And he was very full of energy and kind of made a lot of us stand back. You know, here I am. I'd been part of the school board and my boys and clinicians and, you know, what is this? But David, the young man who had originally done the call to action out in Lebanon, was there. And he said, I know who he is. He has a story. Let me talk to him. And he kind of went over and talked to Frank, and then all of a sudden Frank was more quiet and calm and understood that he was kind of freaking us all out. Over the weeks that came, I got to know Frank, or I had seen Frank in other different areas. And I have a lot of background with kids that come from trauma, trust-based relationship intervention, which is TBRI, something that DCYF, we have classes, training, and it's basically children that come from trauma. They go into that fight-flight part of their brain, and you can't get them out of that until you connect. And then once you connect, sometimes then you can redirect. And from a distance, I had seen Frank in another couple places. I'm like, he's coming from a place of trauma. Something has happened to him. I need to know his story. And when we were at the St. A's, I was called. I wasn't going to go to the St. A's Executive Council at all.
This is on September 29th.
Yes. So I work until 8:30 in the morning. Or I'm on call, I should say. You know, I only get called out if there's a call. So
Just to set up this meeting, this is the first time the Executive Council is going to vote on whether or not to take the $27 million for the COVID vaccine database to track every resident in New Hampshire.
Correct.
Their status.
Right. And so I had seen Rebuild do the call to action for everyone to get there. I had shown up at things like the DHHS one that Rebuild had kind of promoted, like we need a presence, but I really didn't understand what was going on with this grant money. But my phone started blowing up that they weren't going to let people in. People were, you know, upset. Could I come down? Was I on my way? And it hadn't started yet, and I understood it was like a breakfast meeting and then a second meeting for the vote. And so it was like, you know, I didn't get called out. I'm well rested. It was interesting because Governor Sununu had actually been on my Facebook page, my personal page, the night before until 2 in the morning. I had posted legislation that I believe it was either the governor, I think it was the governor of Texas, had put, and he had talked to me with Jane, his chief of staff, about, you know, things and ideas that I felt could help. Like, I was facing co-workers whose religious exemptions were being denied, or the medical exemption was being denied. I had a doctor come stand on the corner and show me the email where she prescribed a certain medication, she would be fired, and she had decided she would leave Concord Hospital and go into private practice because of it. And then I was, you know, a friend who is a chief medical director for Dartmouth Hitchcock at one of their satellite hospitals, is a good friend of mine. He had sent me a YouTube that was published by the administration at Dartmouth Hitchcock, and he says, Terese, wait until you get to 3 minutes and 2 seconds. And it was articulating the fact that they were to only follow the hospital protocol, and if a family had a request for their COVID positive patient, their family member, they were to dismiss and deny that and only follow the hospital's protocol.
Really?
And at the same time...
Now, isn't that against the law?
We have right to try laws that were passed for our critically ill patients, that the family has the right to try.
Isn't COVID considered a very serious illness?
Yes. At that same moment in time, we had a 40-year-old whose wife was desperately advocating and even going for a court injunction to try to do certain things to save her husband's life, and was being told that it wasn't something that they would do. And she was reaching out desperately for everyone to help. And I had thrown that case to this friend of mine, and he said, yes, it's consistent with what we're being told. And he has since passed away, that 40-year-old male. And so I have doctors coming on the corner saying, look, I can't prescribe this. I have videos coming to me saying the right to try is going to be denied. And I have peers of mine who are submitting religious exemptions and even medical exemptions, showing that they've had a history of Guillain-Barré and they've had a history of blood clotting, they've had anaphylactic shock, and their doctors telling them, I can't sign your medical exemption because we're being told if we sign these that our license will be investigated.
By who?
Either, I don't know, it would be the state or the board of licensures.
Do you know who was telling them that directly?
So those were the employees, my clinician peers going to get an exemption to hold on to their job. Their primary care providers were telling them that they were being told that they needed to direct them to the emergency room to get their vaccine.
Wow.
And just do it under the care of the emergency room.
Wow. So you were talking about Governor Sununu on your Facebook page the
Yes.
night before.
Yes.
Was he actually communicating with you?
Yes.
How did that go?
So, so then there's also the National Guard group. So there's all these groups, right, that are telling me, like, how this is impacting them. And so I go to bed, make sure my phone's turned on in case I get called out, and I see a notification that Governor Sununu has commented on my post.
That's
Like,
worth getting up for.
I'm like, what? So I pull my phone out, and there he is, and he's like, you don't understand. We've done something similar to this. And he was talking about HB 220, but you don't understand. It's complicated. I don't have a magic wand. Like, some of that was his commentary. And I quickly went over I created a messenger group for all the Concord Hospital employees that are not wanting to get the mandate. And then there was a whole group at Dartmouth, and there was a whole group. I said, guys,
Call to action.
yeah, Governor Sununu is on my page right now. Come tell him what it is we are asking him to help us with, right? And so we all jumped over, and there was a National Guardsman, and there was nurses, and thank goodness for the night shifters, right? But we honestly gave him a good run for his money with tangible things that we felt he could do until 2 a.m. And his
You
response,
stayed up that long?
he was the final comment at 2 a.m. And his thing was that it was government overreach to tell these hospitals and these employers what to do as far as a mandate. And we said, we understand that. I mean, I'm Republican. I've always voted GOP, right? Like, I don't want government overreach, but we also don't allow discrimination in the workplace. We don't allow hostility in the workplace. We don't allow, there's certain things, there's labor laws, we don't allow our employers to, unjustly, we do all our sexual harassment training. I mean, there's certain things that just, the workplace is supposed to be professional, and things are happening around these exemptions that are not professional, and the right to try is not government overreach to make sure that that's being availed to people. And,
Right.
So we were giving him tangible things that, we're conservatives, but we feel like these are things that the government should step in and help us with. And so that went till 2 a.m. So I get all these phone calls, hey, all this is going on at St. A's, can you come down? So I said, okay, let's head out. And I head down. And it was the breakfast meeting. And I remember someone saying, when you get here, let us know, because they're only letting 50 people in. I will come out so you can come in. And I get in line to go in, and the person that comes up behind me announces herself as a lobbyist for Dartmouth Hitchcock. And I thought, dear Lord, this is $27 million, and this is going to be a room full of people who want to get some of this money. Meanwhile, I know
conflicts of interest.
Right. Meanwhile, I know there's a 40-year-old dad whose wife is desperately trying to get interventions and being denied them.
Right.
And so, of course, inside of me, I'm like, this is not okay. And then I go inside, and someone says, did you see this? Have you read this grant? And I said, no, I haven't. And she said, look at this line. And it was that, it was all about getting the unvaccinated vaccinated. And there was this line, this bottom line, that, if the federal government, were to decide that isolation and quarantine, that we would be obliged to do that.
Right.
And I was like, oh my gosh, now I know why everyone was desperate to get here, right, about this. And Frank was going around, so the breakfast meeting had ended, and they were reconfiguring the room, And Frank was going around, and he was like, so you're just going to put us in FEMA camps? And mind you, at this point, I understand that Frank has spent time. So those of you that don't know, I took the time to try and understand who Frank was. And lo and behold, he shared with me, and I have a video of it, that I did an interview with him, like you're doing with me, that at age 12 or 13, he was relinquished into state custody. And he was really in state custody until he was 35.
Is he okay with you talking about this?
I think so, because we did the video and he allowed me to publish it.
Okay.
So when I learned that about Frank, all of a sudden it was like, he is exactly from a distance. I've known kids who have aged out of the system.
Right.
And someone who has been at the Sununu Center, he shared his roommate is one of the ones who has the active lawsuit right now that was sexually abused. These children go through some very horrific things, and things snowballed for him. He ended up in solitary confinement at one point. Just as an adolescent going through the system, getting to his teenage years, one thing, you need to cut your beard. I'm not cutting my beard. He ended up suing and actually winning the case and actually finally getting out. So knowing that backdrop about Frank and his story, when I walked in and he was saying, you're going to put us in FEMA camps, like, to him, he knows what it's like to lose your freedom.
Yeah.
And be in isolation and quarantine.
Right. Now let me just put this into context too,
Yeah.
before you continue. While Frank was making all of his speeches,
Yeah.
making his points with the people in the audience,
Yes.
the executive council and the governor were not in the room. They were not trying to hold a meeting. They were not disrupting a meeting.
Correct. They had
And
left.
that's an important
Yes.
fact that the media left out with their very false coverage.
Yes. They had left so the room could be reconfigured. They were taking a half-hour break. So the room was being reconfigured. And I was like, he knows that it's Dartmouth Hitchcock lobbyists in here. He knows who's in here far better than I do. I'm so brand new to the scene. But everyone who has stood with me on the corner, knows my story, knows who I am, gave me hugs when I walked in. They're like, Terese, can you go calm him? Can you go talk? And so I went up, but I was like, Frank, take a deep breath. And I, started to address those that were sitting in the crowd. And I said, we do have a dad whose right to try is being denied. We have a Dartmouth lobbyist in here. This grant money states that it's going to isolate and quarantine us. This is not okay. This is not what we want for New Hampshire. And nobody asked us to stop talking. People were asking me questions.
No, I wasn't there.
Yeah.
I did see videos of Frank,
Yeah.
and he was out there.
Yeah.
I didn't see any videos of you. Did you have a megaphone?
No.
Were you yelling?
No.
Because that's the impression that people have when they hear that you and Frank spoke.
Right.
That you mirrored the type of presentation that Frank gave.
Yes. And that's, the media will take one little piece of someone saying something, and
Unfortunately.
make it feel very threatening and violent. But there was so many people in that room, and they're like, again, nobody asked you guys to stop or, any of that nature. So anyways, I was talking, and then Kelly was like, we need to shut this down. They didn't let the 50 people, there's a bunch of people outside that weren't able to come in. We didn't really understand that this clause was in there. And so at that point it was, let's shut it down. There's not enough people here for the venue, was kind of the premise. We've since learned that Governor Sununu actually left right after the breakfast. He wasn't even there in the break time. And Kelly had actually said, let's stop and let them come in and do the vote, that kind of thing. So that was St. A's. Walk away from there.
I want to just interject one more thing.
Yeah.
Governor Sununu was not even in the room when the executive counselor, Dave Wheeler, came out and made the announcement that they were going to postpone the meeting. He had already left.
Yes.
And the news didn't relay that information either.
No, they did not.
Okay, so I'm sorry, keep going.
No, it's okay. And if I didn't say it, like when I did walk into the room, they were just ending the breakfast session. He looked up and saw me, and he did look like he was going to puke. He didn't, and I'm
So
not.
he recognized you from
He
your
did.
Facebook?
He did, from the 2 a.m. Like, I almost stopped by Dunkin's to get him a coffee because, you know, that's a late night, you know, and part of the
Yes.
reason I wasn't even going to go. But I'm like, he's at least interchanging with me. And, like, I have a voicemail on my phone from him. Like, I really held out a lot of hope that maybe we could get a few things to help these, you know, Dartmouth-Hitchcock employees that were getting very close to their end date. And the Concord Hospital had since then announced theirs. You know, like, we need to do something. We've got a Republican governor, Republican House, Republican Senate. How is it that my friends, some of them who are COVID recovered and have the antibodies and have seen adverse reactions in their own journey, that aren't comfortable with putting this into their body yet, be losing their jobs where they have worked there for 22 years and have pensions, and, you know, they're the health, you know, medical care for their family, you know, their spouse is, you know, independent tree trim business and they carry the health insurance for their whole family. Like, just how is this happening that they're losing their jobs? Like, does anybody grasp that this is impacting lives? And so anyways, yeah, so that was St. A's, and so then we did a big push to make sure everyone understood the grant money, what was in there for that clause. We did a huge email campaign, texting, you know, everything we could think of to make sure everyone was hearing that we did not want this in New Hampshire. Of course, I pay federal taxes. I want it to come back to my state. I hope that it comes back here, but I don't want it to come back with strings attached. And the reality is we have 50% of the workforce who is not yet vaccinated. So they say it's like 90% or 70%, but they're not looking at just the demographic of the working people who will lose their jobs. And when you look at that number, that's a big number. That's half of our state is
Right.
going to be impacted.
Especially when you hear from people who work in hospitals in the medical profession, they're already stressed with not enough help.
Yeah. So, yeah, one night I had to accompany one of our patients to the ER, and they were doing a sternal rub on someone in the waiting room, and all of the clinicians there, my heart broke because they all already looked like they were ready to say peace out. I mean, they're so tired and weary from being short-staffed, and now you're going to strip another 20% out. How is that good healthcare policy? How are we truly going to have people in the trenches to do the lab draw, to get the results, to figure out the diagnostics, to treat you, whether you've been in a car accident, you're coming in a cardiac arrest, or whatever your story is? You know, it didn't make sense to me how the COVID recovered clinicians were being let go.
So basically, you went from hero
Yeah, everyone uses that tagline.
to zero.
Yeah. Now we're a danger to society. We're not upholding our oath. We're, you know, all these things because we're not yet comfortable with a vaccine that, you know, the spike protein is still new technology. It has not been trialed over 5-6 years. And we do see the VARs, which has been our standard of reporting, and everyone says.
Explain what the VARS is for people who may not know.
Sure. So it's the reporting device that clinicians use when there's been an adverse reaction to a vaccination. And it takes about an hour to complete. I mean, people say, oh, everyone can throw anything they want in there, and we don't know that all of it's valid. But yet it's the only mechanism we have. And it's been the gold standard, the only mechanism we've used to date, right? So, okay, if it's not good, well, give us something that is, you know, that you have to put your license number in or some sort of, you know, but that requires that too. So it just, I don't understand why everyone's dismissing it, but you know, that's what's happening. People are dismissing it. But when you look at it, there's more adverse reactions to this new vaccine than all other vaccines combined to date.
And what I've heard is in the last 30 years.
Yes. Yeah, and like H1N1, they came up with a vaccine after like 150 adverse reactions, they pulled it.
Right. How many do you know of to date with the COVID vaccines? I've heard it's Right,
20,000,
that's-
30,000, 40,000, it's way up there.
Right.
It's way up there. And so, for a virus that in the first year of our pandemic here in New Hampshire, I'm a numbers person. Anyone who follows me knows I'm not good with my grammar and spelling, but I am a number science people person. And if you run the numbers, that first year of the pandemic in New Hampshire, the average person had about a 3% chance of contracting COVID. And then, the 1.3 million people in New Hampshire divided by how many cases we had, you can get to that number pretty quickly. And then out of that 3%, we had a 99, in my demographic, a 99.9% survival rate.
Right, it wasn't what we were being told.
I really thought we were all going to be dead in the first 30 days.
From what we were told.
We don't know. Something happens in science. When it first broke, I was honestly like, really? I finally found my soulmate. I have the most beautiful new horse. My boys are finally secure, with adoptions pending, and now we're all gonna die, and it was horrible. I didn't want to touch my groceries. I was right there with everybody, right? What are we really up against? And still having to go into work, and am I bringing it home to my family? I mean, it's been emotionally a very exhausting season for everybody across the board. But then as time marches on, I love the whole trust the science, and I'm like, okay, but as clinicians, we're taught to trust the evidence. So my analogy for that is if someone says the building's on fire, the alarms are going off, and you smell smoke and you see flame, you get out of the building, right? You don't wait for the arson report. So sometimes we don't have the arson report. Sometimes we don't have the coroner's reports until time marches on. But now we have coroner's reports, and we're showing myocarditis, and we're showing blood clotting, and we're showing stroke, and we're showing all these things all within 10, 15 days of an injection. Now, could that person who just possibly be predisposed to having a stroke, and it just happened to fall after they had this injection? Maybe. But do we know with all certainty that wasn't some sort of a catalyst? So you have to look at the trending, right? And we're seeing trends. We are. We can't deny it. But we're told, nope, it's safe. And then the biggest narrative that really I had issue with is, if you get this, then now you can go hug your family, you can go do Thanksgiving, you don't have to wear your mask, all of that. And I thought, what the heck are they saying? That is not science. So even if I get the flu vaccine, or I get the shingles vaccine, or I get the pneumo vaccine, all it does is build up an army that when I do come in contact with that assault, my body is ready to fight it better, and I'm less symptomatic.
Right.
But I can still get it, and I can still transmit it to people. So now to say all precautions need to go out the window, to me that was worrisome. And when I heard, well, if you're vaccinated and you're in contact with COVID tracing, you can just keep working your shifts. Don't worry about it, and I'm like, well, please make sure everyone's still using all their precautions. Make sure that we're still, and we weren't changing out our mask every transaction like we were taught in nursing school. It was the same mask for the whole shift. I mean, there's just all these things anyways, so I'm probably digressing. But here I am, a nurse, I'm a mom, trying to navigate through all this. But the line for me was seeing people lose their job or not be able to finish nursing school when we desperately needed clinicians in the healthcare field. It didn't make sense. So that's where I started standing. The St. A's thing, the money coming in to isolate and quarantine us was terrifying to me.
There's a lot of draconian things taking place in countries like Australia.
Right, exactly.
That our mainstream media doesn't cover.
Right, and that was another catalyst for me, is I had seen someone interview 2 individuals in Australia and ask them specifically, what do you have to say to those of us in America? And this one man responded, and he said, we're not born with a flag in our hand here in Australia. We're a very complacent people. we've never had a reason not to trust our government. And he said, we had 5 new cases in the entire country today, and out of, I think it was 25 million people, we are not allowed to leave our house except for an hour within 2 miles of our home. And he said, please, don't just do it for America, don't just do it for you, but will you please stand for the rest of the world before it's too late? And I was just like, wow. How did they get there? How did they get there? And so yeah, paying attention to countries that have high vaccination rates and how, how they were doing, breakthrough in, Israel, and just looking all around the globe. It was no longer far-fetched that things can actually go down a path. I was suddenly starting to see things that reminisce, like I could never understand.
So to put this into perspective,
Yeah.
people have a tendency to think that type of police action doesn't happen here.
Right.
But you and I lived through that on October 13th.
Right.
We saw 32 state troopers in the room with us with another 40 to 50 or maybe more behind the curtain.
Right.
How do you feel about that?
Still makes me feel like I'm on a roller coaster and I just had my tummy drop out from under me.
It's surreal. It's a little surreal.
It is very surreal. Yeah, I never envisioned when we went back on October 13th, people said, people were suspicious. Why is it at the police academy? Why is it this? Why is it that? And I'm like, oh, it's just a bigger venue, and it's in Concord, so it's easy for me to get to because I live in Loudoun, so I was like totally good. I was just naive. I just thought, it's part of NHTI. It's not a big deal. That's why I went to nursing school. Like, come on, guys, let's go. And I had no idea that it could be because they were, in this mindset of, something happening where they would need that kind of police force. And yeah, so when I was tapped on the shoulder and I went to the back and I'm getting in the paddy wagon, I hear from inside the wagon, that's my wife, that's my child, please leave them alone, please. And realizing, hearing someone get on the other side, there's a partition in the back of the paddy wagon. So one side was 3 females, the other side ended up being 3 males, and that was AJ Todd. And that's when I started to cry. Because how do you, to see the helplessness in his eyes, he was getting lifted into up the step into the back, and him crying that out. The helplessness of a father not being able to protect his wife and child. And that was hard to watch. And they didn't tell him where they were going. They took her and his 4-year-old to a different place to be processed. So there's about a 3-hour period of time where he did not know where his 4-year-old was. If he was with mom. If he was scared. If she was okay. And no one could tell us anything. And so we're in the back of this paddy wagon, and we're driving for what felt like forever. Monica was very nervous, and she just kept talking and talking and talking. And at one point, for the first time in my life, I felt the sensation of claustrophobia. And I'm usually able to as a nurse, dealing with death, I'm able to kind of park things and stay focused. And I remember closing my eyes, and there was a sweet moment before the meeting that we were outside where my 7-year-old was actually raising his hands to heaven as he sang one of the songs that we had picked up to sing after we prayed. And I closed my eyes, and I was focusing on that, and it kind of calmed me a little bit. But then I remember saying, Monica, it's getting really hot in here, and the air is kind of stale. Let's let our words be few. And she said, oh, you want me to stop talking? It was like, yes, because I felt like I couldn't breathe a little bit, and it was probably just my own anxiety. I don't know. But we finally parked, and I think it was Frank that was on the other side of the partition. He was like, I'm sure we're at County, because the length of the drive. and we were parked back there for a while, and it was getting very stuffy, and one of the guys says, you know, it's getting hard to breathe, and they're like, oh, we'll open the door. And we're like, oh, thank Jesus. They opened the door, and then one by one they brought us out, and we had to strip down everything. I mean, our clothes were on, but we had to take our shoes, our jewelry, everything else off, and then patted down, and then we were put into cells. And I was put in with a 70-year-old who had been thrown to the ground. She sustained a concussion.
Now, I want to ask you a question. You're
Yeah.
a nurse.
Yeah.
Did she seriously sustain a concussion?
Yeah, she was diagnosed. We have the medical documentation.
Okay.
And
And I want people to hear that. I'm asking as a question, but,
Right.
you know, sometimes people will
Right.
question
Yeah.
or, you know.
yeah, our legal team, because I've had a lot of different entities reach out to me to ask questions. So, like, our legal team understands the importance of not remaining perfectly silent, but also being very careful, and they've coached us. Like, we want the state to prove everything that they alleged that we did,
And they should.
but at the same time, like, the importance of letting truth be heard, because of what, you know, this just is not okay.
No, it's not okay.
And so she was, you know, I'm still getting to know her, but she was very shaken. She was having a hard time putting her.
Can you share the woman's name? I mean, it's been posted.
Kathleen. Yeah, so Kathleen was the one they got all the optics on. She was in the camo, but she's 71. She wasn't able to put all her words together. I don't know if she was just really shaken or if that was her baseline. Like, I hadn't met this woman before, but she was all scraped up. She's like, I'm going to be really sore tomorrow, you know, and she was crying, and I was in the cell, and the cell's kind of like this. It was floor to ceiling glass. And so I'm holding her, and I remember looking up, there's like all these guards, and some of them were really young, and I said, and the guards at Auschwitz were just doing their job, right, guys? And I just was holding her because she was crying.
What was
and
their reaction to that?
one of them just looked down at the ground, the other ones looked away. Like, you could tell they were wrestling with what was happening, and then one of them was like, well, we don't know what happened. And I'm like, I know that you weren't there, and my only request is, as time marches on, you watch the footage and you see what happened and you educate yourself, because what happened today was not okay. And so we were in there, and then, of course, I had to go to the bathroom, and all we had was this little cinder block, like, you know, 3 or 4 high, part wall, and on the other side was this aluminum toilet, no water, no toilet paper, no sink, and again, floor to ceiling glass with all these guards and men walking by.
You're kidding me.
No.
You had no privacy?
Nope. So I got to go to the bathroom there. I mean, I'm a nurse, so I'm kind of like, I am who, you know what I mean? But yeah, so I had to go to the bathroom, and, you know, for me not to be able to wash my hands was against every fiber in my being as a nurse.
I would be disturbed that there were men over there as well.
Yeah.
In my mind,
It was humiliating.
It might be one thing if it were female troopers,
Right.
but it brings it to another level that there were male troopers there.
Right. So they brought us out to do our fingerprinting, and I remember the guy who's doing my fingerprinting, he's like, you know, I heard you were a foster mom. I'm like, yeah. He's like, I am a foster dad. And I said, this is absolutely unbelievable that this is happening. Because when you go through the licensing, like, you have a home study case study that's like 60 pages long of every single piece of your background.
I would assume that they're trying to determine if you're a stable person or not.
Yes.
And you were declared to be stable, or
Yes.
you wouldn't have been able to adopt your children.
Right. In fact, when Kevin and I started dating, I gave him a copy. I said, go read this.
You're lucky
And
to
if you
have
still
me.
want to go, if you still want to go for a cup of coffee, here's my whole story, right? You know, because we all have a story. But yeah, no, it's really, and he's like, and I said, you need just, again, I said, you need to promise me when this is all said and done that you go back and you look at what really happened today, because it was not okay. And he was very kind, and so I just tried to keep that message with these individuals, because I, you know, said to them, you're going to be asked to do things that are not okay, and you got to figure out where you're going to land on that.
And World War II has taught us it's not okay to follow orders.
Right. And, you know, a lot of people will say, well, the troopers were just doing their job that day. And I'm like, well, as a nurse, if a doctor gives me an order and I don't make sure it's the right medication, the right dose, and the right patient, and that he didn't just make a mistake because he's tired and weary, and I administer that and it causes harm, it's my license. It's not the doctor's. So as troopers, you take an oath, right, to do the right thing and to know when it's appropriate to tell someone, oh, you're being disruptive, you need to leave the meeting. Oh, you're not going to leave, we're going to give you a ticket if you don't leave right now.
That's correct.
Oh, this is the behavior that you did. You know, you don't just bring someone to the back and arrest them with no...
So let me ask you this. For me, the tone was set after the governor led us in a prayer.
Mm-hmm.
We all said amen.
Yep.
Now, you were arrested for saying amen.
Allegedly, so it was disorderly conduct. We did not even get a complaint filed until the Friday, not last Friday, but the Friday before. So it was almost a month later that we finally got a complaint.
Makes you think they're scrambling to try to figure out how are they going to make this look legitimate.
Right. And so we have this portal where our legal team will upload things, or we can upload our videos or our evidence up to it. And there was an alert that there was an update Saturday. So I went and I looked, and it had all of our arrest summaries listed there, so I could see all 9. And I pulled mine up, and I'm of course eager, and I'm like reading through it, and it was because I allegedly said the word amen. And at that point I said, Lord, you have a sense of humor, right? Because
Yes.
like really?
Well,
And
after I heard that, I went back and I looked at the video from 2 different videographers.
Mhm.
And I watched the prayer,
Yeah.
and I listened to the room say amen. It was very soft, it was very quiet and peaceful and respectful. Nobody yelled it.
Yeah.
And then the governor immediately led us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Yes.
I was dumbfounded how anyone in that room could have been charged with disorderly conduct for saying amen.
And even if like people say, well, how many times did you say amen? How loud did you say it? I'm like, I don't even remember, I honestly don't remember saying it. And I had even forgotten that he had done the prayer at one point. And I'm like, oh yeah, like the whole room did do it then. But I'm like, even then, it should have been, hey, you're being disruptive, you need to leave the meeting. It's
But-
not an arrestable...
Correct. And there was a camera on the row right behind you and 1 seat over from Frank.
Right, Katrina.
And that camera panned over to you, and I think you were stretching up in the air, and I don't know if you were praying or if you were just stretching, but you stretched up, you came back down,
Yeah.
the camera came off you, and then within 30 seconds the camera came back, troopers came in, tapped both of you on the shoulder,
Yeah.
you got up and left. There was clearly nothing to legitimately trigger those troopers coming over and asking you to follow them out and then arrest you.
And that was when Gatsis was being fiscally responsible. And I was like, thank you. In my heart, I was saying, thank you that we have an elected official that's looking out for our tax dollars.
Yeah.
But yeah, so, I don't know, and then finally, they tell us that we're going to be able to I got to make my phone call, had to call my boyfriend's dad, who lives in Boscawen, because it was Kevin, my boyfriend. We've been dating for 1.5 years. The poor thing didn't know what he was getting himself into. He dated me. But it was his mom that had been outside with the boys, thank goodness, and she was taking them over to the planetarium. So I knew the boys were with her, so that's where I wanted to make my first phone call, is to hear that the boys were okay. And I knew they were in Boscawen down the road to come get me. Kevin was at work. He was watching Katrina's live, so he was like, what the heck is going on, and kind of freaking out at work. But anyways, I made my phone call, went back to the cell, felt like it was forever. And then finally got to come out of the jail, and I come out, and there was like 30 people there waiting to make sure we all got out safe. And I remember Tom Sanderson, he was the first doctor, well, his daughter's a doctor, he was the first one to pull over the car that first Wednesday, and has stood with me on that corner,
Yeah.
like diligently, steadfast. And he was there, and he gave me this big hug, and he goes, "Kid, we got a 4-1 vote." And he said, "We got a no vote." And I just, like, wanted to cry. I was like, oh my gosh, you're kidding me, after all that. And so left there, went to where the boys were, made sure they were all set, and then came home. But when we got this arrest summary and it said amen, of course I'm looking at all 9 to see what they say. And one's for, allegedly for a loud noise, and that was for Frank. And I'm like, Frank, like, I didn't even hear you fart. Like, I heard nothing, you know? And so, and then the other interesting thing is all 9 of us have the same arresting officer, which, how would the same arresting officer hear all of us?
It's impossible because as they're taking A.J. Todd across the back, there was a gentleman leaning against the wall. And he made a comment, I'm going to paraphrase, but he made a comment along the lines of, "You're arresting the wrong guy." And another state trooper pointed to him and said, "Come with me."
Right.
In my mind, that's the arresting officer.
Right. And it just so happens this arresting trooper, if you go and look up his name, because of course, you know, this is our story, right? So we're just as interested as everyone else, just had on October 20th, 7 days after the October 13th, a judge ruled to release his files from his previous employer in Canaan for some sort of questionable police, you know, the way he was practicing his job. Every piece of footage I have seen, there's nothing there that warrants what happened. I did actually have someone reach out to me that was retired FBI who was there off duty on his own and is willing to speak at any of our trials, hearings,
That will be
and
very helpful.
also for any of the hearings that might happen for, you know, outside of our case. Like there was a committee at the State House that wanted to speak to what happened that day. Because the reality is we have to go through this criminal case, right? And they could give us a trial date that's a year from now. And then a civil case could follow potentially once everything's dropped. But that's like 3 years down the road. In the meantime, we may actually legitimately have someone that incited violence, that caused a 70-year-old to get a concussion, that, you know, pulled a mother from her child, you know, things that happen that in any other context, people would be going to Concord PD and filing a report. I just saw somebody do this, this, and this.
That's right.
And I have concerns, right? So for that to be looked at independently from, like, people are like, oh, you know, you have such a strong case. And I'm like, yeah, well, that's great, but that's like 3 years down the road. Meanwhile, the potential perpetrator, you know, and even if we have a civil case down the road, who pays for that but the taxpayers?
Well, you know,
So,
there's another aspect of this that I have always found very disturbing. As those arrests were going on, and in fact, let me set this up. So I served 3 years on the school board here in Wyndham, and for one of those years, I was chairman. Nothing happened in that meeting without my knowledge, prior to or during that meeting.
Right.
If there were going to be police officers there, and I never allowed police officers to be there, at least I never requested them to be. You know, there may have been bigger meetings that, you know, just by a policy, you know, they come. But if there were going to be 80 police officers at one of my meetings, that wouldn't have happened. And when any disturbance occurred in any of my meetings, I would stop the meeting. Out of respect for the people,
Right.
especially if someone might be injured and
Right.
might need help. And what disturbs me tremendously about what happened is Governor Sununu never stopped talking. There was nothing there that he felt that was out of the ordinary. While people were being arrested, 9 people were arrested.
Great.
And that meeting never skipped a beat. So how was there disorderly conduct?
Right. And the other thing too is, you know, people reach out and they're like, I felt like I needed to jump up and do something. You know, I felt horrible. I can't believe, you know, I'm feeling guilt and shame that I didn't do something to protect you, Terese. So Tom, the guy I called Dad, who used to stand on the corner with me, he's the man with the neat little cap sitting next to me in the video. And I do. I call him Dad. Like, that's... And he felt like he should have done something, and he didn't know what to do. And many people said they left because they were afraid. Like, there's no rhyme or reason of who was going to get picked next.
There were a lot of people who left.
Half the room left almost. And then you had people who say they went to their truck and they cried. You know, they just cried. They were just, you know, and so, you know, even for me, when I went and requested the 91A of, you know, who was my arresting officer and a couple pieces of information while we tried to figure out who our legal team was going to be, I remember driving down to Hazen Drive, parking my car, and I'm a pretty fierce person. Anyone who goes through DCYF cases and fights for 2 boys for 7 years is pretty tough in my book, right? And I've never had reason to ever feel any apprehension, but I park my car and I get out, and all of a sudden I was like feeling this like fear, and I got back in my car and I cried because I'm like, these are the people to protect us. These are the people to help us stay safe and to help me raise up my boys in a safe community. And I don't feel safe. And it was really a horrible, I just had to grieve that. I was just grieving the fact that this actually could even happen. And
I agree.
Somebody reached out to me and they said, you realize there is case law and there is a precedent for the chilling of the First Amendment right. In the video footage that I've seen, everyone in that room had their First Amendment right chilled that day. And so
Absolutely.
There's 160 First Amendment civil right violations.
Yours are more egregious.
Right. And so, you know, that has been relayed to those who were there. They're very adamant that they want to go in together and figure out a way to go ahead and petition file that, because they do feel like it was a game changer for them. They do feel as though they're nervous about showing up at the next meeting or protesting, you know, or flag waves, you know, and their ability to participate in the political process. I kind of just keep reminding everyone that I'm just one person. I'm still a mom trying to get the grilled cheese and take care of the dog that just puked, and, you know, getting through, you know, the hustle of life. But I've definitely had a huge learning curve in the last 10 weeks to just all the liberty groups here in New Hampshire, all the people who are trying to fight for this live free or die. We are not the live by coercion and look the other way people. And when I do stand, that's probably what fuels my spirit the most, because that 8 out of 10 cars honking, you know, they're busy, they're running their errands on a Saturday morning, but in their spirit, they know that our freedoms and our liberties and our constitutional rights are in jeopardy. And I refuse to let this become Australia. I'm not going to let it go. And I'm going to stand at all costs, whether it be that I get arrested, whether it be someone file an erroneous report on my nursing, whatever it will be, I have to know that I'm doing what's right. And I've had people come and say, well, you're disparaging the GOP, and if something happens to Sununu, then it will fall to a Democrat, and, you know, then what? And what, you know, things will just get worse. And my answer to that is that, you know, I'm a Christian, if I'm going to church and I found out that the pastor is molesting one of my boys, if I look the other way because I don't want to disparage the church, what am I doing to my child? And in the long run, what am I doing to the church?
That's right.
If I address it and I say, whoa, time out, this was wrong, this is not okay, and we deal with it, I'm deeply rooted, so I'm still going to be a Christian. I'm still going to see the value in being part of a church congregation. The GOP is the party line I voted on. It's founded on, you know, conservative. I tell people I'm socially liberal because I'm this foster mom, and I always want to save the day. I do a ministry for kids in care. You know, I sleep in the homeless shelter in the winter time, you know, for the women's area. Like, socially I'm very liberal, but fiscally I'm very conservative. I truly believe that my dollar going to buy a basketball or football cleats for a kid in foster care is going to go a lot further than me sending it up to Washington in hopes that any of it will ever come back. So that's just kind of been the way I've always felt the Republican Party felt. And I've never dug deeper or gone a whole lot more into it than that. And so, I don't want things to get worse, but when I look across the spectrum and I look at history, and I do love history, it was always we the people. It always had to come back to we as individuals taking responsibility and standing up for our communities and what was right. And if we don't deal with what's in our own house, in our own backyard, in our own city, we can't sit there and just run down the highway thinking it's some big thing in Washington that's the problem. We have to take care of our circle of influence, right? The things that I can go to my school board, I can stand up on the corner, I can try to write an email and text and show up for these meetings and educate my friends who don't have time to get there, that are working different shifts. I can advocate, I can be a voice. I am only, my favorite quote, I am only one, and I can't do everything.
Right.
But I will refuse to not do the things that I can do. That's Helen Keller. That has been my life quote. I can't save all the kids from going up into a residential home, but I could stand up for the one that crossed my path.
Right.
And then when his brother came into the picture, I had a choice. And I chose to say yes. Both of them with a family history of schizophrenia, me as a single mom, 13 months apart, and anyone who's taking care of them knows they give you a run for your money.
I can see the love you have for them.
And it's not easy, and I sometimes don't always want to do it, and I need a break from them. But the reality is, if I invest the next 15 years in 2 little boys, 7 years for a human life that might grow up to be a strong man, it's worth the investment. I'm here for a short time, and I want everything that I have within me to count. And if now I'm being put into a place where I'm going to get tapped on the shoulder and arrested for allegedly saying amen because I tried to participate in the political process to save my coworkers who are losing their jobs, then so be it. It's interesting, a lot of people say, Terese, did you lose your job? Are you under the mandate? I have yet to be mandated at my job. I'm very fortunate. It was another God gift that I took this job last March that allows me to be home with the boys during the day. That's on call at 5 p.m. That happens to be a national, well, actually it's international company that has 26,000 clinicians working for it. 52% of us are not vaccinated, and they have no intention of mandating it until it's required by OSHA or the federal government. I was put in a position to stand up even though it's not affecting me. And so many people will come and stand, or they'll wait to stand until it's directly impacting them.
Right. And that's the problem.
Or once they get their exemption, I don't see them again.
But you're empowering people. You're awakening people.
And that's,
You're educating people, making them realize how important it is now. What's that poem from Nazi Germany? First they came for,
right.
and we can't let that happen here.
The longer we all wait to stand up for our constitutional rights, the harder this is going to get.
Right.
And I don't want it to slip any further. You've got everything, and that's the one thing with everyone that comes to stand, it is definitely a tapestry. And I say this is not a solo, this is a symphony. Everyone has their own reason for finally having the courage or the bravery to come and participate in the political process, right? Whether it be a loved one with an adverse reaction, a job loss, whatever, right to try. And everyone is different. And I try to tell people, I'm not telling the silent majority to be silent anymore. If they have all this righteous anger in them, and they want to go beep a horn, or they want to go do this, or they want to go do that, I am not in a position to tell them. I'm only responsible for my fight. My fight is my fight. And for the people who are following me, we have a phrase, I love your fight. Your fight is your fight. Frank's fight is Frank's fight. Teresa's fight is her fight. But at the end of the day, what's important is that we're all fighting for our God-given constitutional rights that our forefathers had the foresight to see, that everything falls apart if we don't stick to that. Even if we're in a healthcare emergency, we still need to keep our compass on what this country was founded on.
Individually, we're one voice.
Right.
When we speak together, we're one loud voice, and we can move mountains.
Amen. See, I do say it. But, the corner, it was me by myself, and those lunch hours, there were several lunch hours where I would start with by myself, but I never ended by myself. It was like God always gave me that little breadcrumb of encouragement. And that one turned into 13, turned into 30, turned into 72, turned into 140, turned into 300, and it's always different faces. That's like the fun thing about going down there on Saturday. There's always a new batch of faces. And if we, the people, can say, hey, you work for us. You work to uphold an oath of our constitutional rights.
Yeah.
That's, at the end of the day, what we need you to do. You're either for freedom or you're for tyranny.
Now, I've heard Governor Sununu refer to that kind of talk as fringe and anti-government. What do you think about that?
I don't know how, to me there's all this noise and chatter and complication of, it's too complex, there's too many strings attached, I don't have a magic wand. Like, those were things he said to me on my Facebook page, right?
Talking points.
And my thing is, no, you're either for freedom or you're for tyranny.
Did you tell him that?
Yes. So this is the other thing, too, we haven't talked about. On our bail conditions, when we left, we have to stay 1,000 feet away from Sununu and the Executive Council. That's football fields away from the Capitol. So now there's 4 meetings
It's 10 football fields.
that I have not been able to go and attend and participate in the political process. And, I get nervous going down Main Street. Because what if he's in his office? What if he really wants to shut me up and quiet me down? You know what I mean?
Right.
So we're going to deal with that Friday. We didn't have a docket number to be able to even file a motion to have the bail conditions changed because they waited so long to even file the complaint. So we'll be dealing with that on Friday and asking the judge to hopefully rule from the bench. From my understanding, they bring everyone who was arrested, and one by one the judge will go through and what's your plea, are you guilty or not guilty, and our legal team will be there and be asking about all the discovery. They're going to be asking for quite a bit, and then also for the bail conditions to be relieved, that's a violation of our constitutional rights to have such bail conditions.
Would you like people to show up and show your support?
Yes, I think this was a line that was crossed. I think it was a very blatant line that was crossed. So my attorney is like, there's 5 parts to your First Amendment. He rattles them all off. He's like, they violated the first, those first 4, like, clearly were violated. And then when we got the complaint and it was the word amen, he's like, okay, this was a slant, this,
Freedom of religion.
this is 5. They did all 5. And he can't even believe it. So, but yes, I do think it's important that we all show up. This is all about constitutional rights. It's really about, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, grievance, if we cut people off at the knees that they are too afraid to participate in the political process, then we have completely lost everything this country is about.
How would you ask people to handle themselves on Friday?
Peacefully. There's been a lot of work put into, we do not want to feed into the optics that the media wants to maybe say that we're fringe, or that we are insurrectionist, or that we've been called wannabe Antifa. I mean, every word under the sun. No, we are doctors, we are engineers, we are accountants, we're nurses, mechanics. We are people
Blue
who
collar,
have
white collar.
never been involved in the political protesting liberty groups or anything else. And we're showing up because it's had a direct impact already on our lives or someone that we know. There's a lot of people who are, this First Amendment is really, we've seen people blocked on Facebook, and, you're not allowed to have free thought without, misinformation and, all these things. And we're finding out things a year ago weren't really misinformation, so there's a lot of people that feel like our First Amendment right, we keep letting it slowly slip away. And now it's time to take that strong stand for that First Amendment and our constitutional rights. And so showing up to have your sign. We're not going to make a circus out of the courtroom. If you come inside, we're asking that you be completely quiet when you do come inside. Just to let the judge know that we, the people, feel that this was a line that was crossed. And we're here to support the fact that we are grieving that First Amendment right and that it was violated. There are people who have wanted to, or feel, David is one of them, that we need to normalize the exercising of our constitutional rights. That as we get shamed and we get pushed into a corner, or it's become no longer normalized to speak your thought without being demonized. He takes it so far as, my Second Amendment, open carry. It's, I'm demonized for doing that, but our forefathers were Minutemen, and that second backs up the first. So to take it so that this isn't looked at as an abnormal thing to participate in the political process. It's not an abnormal thing to exercise our basic constitutional rights without everyone feeling as though it's fringe or it's, insurrection or terrorist. No, it's us standing up for what our forefathers.
If Governor Sununu were sitting here in this studio right now, what would you want to tell him?
It's never too late to break free from the binds that tie.
What do you mean by that?
That whatever is causing you to make choices and decisions that are affecting livelihoods, our hospitals, our schools, our children's right to a good education, the ability to participate in the political process, whatever is driving you to infringe on those basic pieces of our story. I guess my heart kind of grieves the fact that someone would just kind of dismiss the reality of what's going on. And why would you want to live your days knowing that you were a participant or responsible for causing a nurse to be arrested for saying the word amen? I don't know. I don't know what I would say to him. It makes me sad. Just like when I see the troopers, it makes me sad. These are people that, I go to work, I work hard, I pay my taxes, I contribute to society, I pull 2 kids out of state care, decide to go to the distance for them. And I guess I always give everyone the benefit of the doubt that they're doing the right thing. And there's some very simple things he could have done that would have saved a lot of my coworkers who have already lost their jobs. The emotional stress and panic and anxiety and depression and everything that they're going through. And they were active participants in providing care and saving lives. And yet, here we are, live free or die state with a whole Republican governor, House, and Senate. And yet it feels like nobody's doing anything to fix it.